out into the air. There is plenty here to share. All are welcome, take a chair and sing a song loud and strong. Men of war and men of care, maidens fierce and maiden fair. Raise your horns into the air and sing a song loud and proud and strong.
Hello, 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 boys, girls, eldritch horrors, dictators of micronations, and everyone else who decided to join in to this video. My name is the Shadow of the Hawk, and today it's episode 2 of my Analyzing Humanity series, I guess. I don't know. Today we're talking about Del Bar from the Dragon Prince, and I hate this faction less than I hated Neolandia, because the lore... I mean, there's problems. I'll get into those problems, but as a whole, it's a lot better. It's a lot better. Still not much there. The team really did not really give you a lot to go on if you're trying to run a game in this world, but hey, that's why you tuned in, right? Not because someone sent you. Not because you're coming from a different channel. No, you're here for my content. I'm not self-conscious, you're self-conscious. So, let's get into this. Del Bar. I've decided to actually organize this video for once. Or rather, these kinds of videos. So, what we've got going on is, first up, is going to be the... That's right. Editing. Woo! So, geography and climate. What is Del Bar described as in the Tales of Xadia book? When you open it up, it tells you that it's described with being kind of like a highlands, being a very treacherous tundra, very cold, and it specifically mentions the northern region has a lot of thick forests and great lakes, and the south is very mountainous. In the verse, there is no place better to find quality wood or quality ore than Del Bar. Up on the map, you're going to be seeing my problem with the description of forests and lakes in the north. The south is more forested than the north, and there is not a single lake on this fucking map. What? You had one fucking job! You could have said the north is an open, treacherous grassland, and the south is a forested, mountainous region. But you didn't! You didn't! How fucking hard was it to look at your own map and go, mesh, grass, forests, mountains, where they're supposed to be, mesh. Like, the sheer idiocy involved in this map makes me want to commit a hate crime. I guess too, I don't know, you guys decide. In the comments down below, tell me who I should commit a hate crime against. Don't actually do that, please. I don't want to get arrested. That'd be bad. But one thing that stands out about the description of the lore that I really, really actually like is the idea that Del Bar is a place full of monsters. That the Del Baran society is one of poetic barbarians. People who are rallied around the commonality of going out and killing dangerous monstrosities that threaten the homestead. That takes us into the next point about Del Bar. That's right. We need raw military power. We need unconventional warfare. We need monsters. I butchered that W.R. Monger quote. I am sorry. So, in the book, we have musk bears, which are described as, like, bigger than average bears, somewhat territorial. I imagine there's a little bit of magic spliced in because it's the world of Xadia. But not really too much else. And, I mean, yeah, you could go out and kill musk bears. I imagine hearing about how Ragnar the Red slaughtered a musk bear with his great axe would get pretty boring after you hear about Beowulf the Mighty, who strangled a bear with his bare hands, and Helga the Huntress, who felled one with her bow. It would get kind of boring after a while. So I decided to say, fuck you to Wonderstorm, and I'm gonna populate this region with a few different beasties and monsters. Some of them are more traditional. monsters. Some are things I'm stealing from obscure sources. And some are, I did a 15-minute Google search and just copy and pasted a bunch of Scottish monsters. Because we don't really talk about Scotland that much. And, I mean, if you look at the map again, it looks like it's going to be a lot of highlands. It looks like there's going to be a lot of, like, open, hilly areas. That makes me think Scotland. You know, like the warriors, the disunified tribes, the bit of, bardicness. I mean, you could say that's the Norse. I'm doing the Scottish. Because fuck you, this is my channel. Make your own video if you want to talk about the Del Barans being Vikings. Also, the Del Barans, aside from being poets, don't really have too much going for them to make me think they're Vikings. Like, they're not coastal raiders, they're not traders, they don't have bees. Like, they're not Viking-y to me. They don't come off as Vikings. Duren comes off like Vikings to me. Which I will get into in the Durenian video. A lot of videos, a lot of plans. Let's hope I go through with them. So, monsters. What kind of monsters are we looking at? Well, in the lowlands, you would possibly see the Muklug, a creature from the Grim Hollow D&D setting. Things that can spawn fog and teleport through it with a blink. Creatures that have voracious appetites, but can be reasoned with by those who know how, and can be plied off with meat. There are also the Kalkara, inspired by the Ranger's Apprentice book series. Small, compact, chimp ape-like creatures with hypnotic gazes that can stun a man, and thick fur that can withstand a lance strike, and a grim, primeval intelligence that can understand barter and basic tactics, but very little else. Then you've got some more basic creatures, like large wolves, bears, and boars, plentifully filling the woods and the areas of the grasslands where they can find a place to rear their young. And on the coasts, great sharks and squids delve up from the deep to snag unaware fishermen and sailors. In the mountains, going back into like some more traditional stuff, you've got griffins flying down from their eyries to pick off cattle and wayward children. Their nests, only the greatest of champions can climb to the top, and only the most hawk-eyed of huntresses can fell one with their bows. But slaying a griffin and clearing their nest is no achievement compared to rearing a griffin and taming one. Though it is known that griffins raised in captivity are smaller, more like hunting dogs, than they are the gigantic beasts that haunt the nightmares of those who live in and among the mountains. Harpies are another winged creature that stalk the coasts, letting out shrieks when they attack. Apparently, they'll appear as if they are feminine, but both the males and females are the same haggish, ugly creature that'll snatch up children and stray pets that huntresses need to be vigilantly watchful with both their eyes and ears. And worms, great behemoths of the deep that come up and strike with vicious ferocity at coastal villages and ships. Creatures that even the huntresses must flee from, for their arrows do nothing against their thick hides. Only a champion of extreme skill and renown, with weapons forged for this intense purpose, can fell such a creature. And for the coasts, slaying a worm is as akin to slaying a musk bear of the forests or the plains. It is a sign of pure skill and warrior ability. Another beast of the deep, the Kelpie. It steers away from adult beings, knowing that they are too great a threat, but will watch with amusement as a child comes to the coast and is lured into the deep to be devoured by this plant-like horse creature. In the mountains, rumors and stories of these gray giants called the Greymen are everywhere. Few claim to have actually seen one. Of course, there are plenty of signs, if you know where to look. Caravans that have gone missing or been found slaughtered. Villages crushed by some unknown force. Griffins found ripped to pieces as if by some great creature. But no one has ever recorded a sighting of a Grey Man or lived. In the open plains, the Buckins are large cats that will strike out of hidden lairs at cattle and wayward travelers. It is a common saying in northern Del Bar that if you hear a hiss in the night, a buckin is ready to fight. And back to the mountains, we have a horrific creature that comes out during the storms, the Bethir, serpents that can ride upon lightning and strike with a thunderous blast, capable of even punching through the gates of cities and waylaying the forges. Such a creature is horrifically dangerous, and only the most skilled of combatants dare fight it, for they cannot rely on their weaponry, as the conductive nature of metal will leave them open to the Bethir's attacks. Instead, they must wrestle... That's annoying. They must wrestle the creature and break its bones, tear its flesh, even with their own teeth, to bring such a creature down. But not all creatures of Del Bar are the monstrous things that I have described. Oh no. There is one beast of the woods and the plains and the mountains that the men and women of Del Bar have come to respect. The vulva. Loosely based off, the vulva of Scottish mythology. These are friendly wolfmen, limited in intellect, but great in strength and loyalty. They will stand beside mankind should they be stood beside in turn. They serve as ranchers and miners and farmers for the people of Del Bar. They do the hard labor, but unlike a slave of human stock, and to call them a slave would be a grave insult, for they love the work to contribute to the pack. Though if abused, they will be a horrific and dangerous thing to be put down, and as such are treated with utmost respect by the hunters and champions of Del Bar. So, I completely winged... I mean, I've got the script, but I completely winged that in one take. I think that was pretty boss, personally. Moving on to... That was cool. Gimmick. Generalized culture. As I expressed before, warrior poets and hunting tales. They virtually live off the good tales told by their hunters and their champions, their warriors. There's even a myth in Del Bar stating that a huntress was unable to find food for her family, and so she fed them through the long winter months on stories of great hunts in the past, of heroes and great conflicts, possibly even the Great Migration from Zadia, of which mankind was forced away by the whims of the elves and the dragons. It also mentions that there is a king's moot, a gladiatorial combat, to choose and decide a leader of Del Bar. I have opinions about this. See, choosing the leader of a kingdom based off simply who's the best at killing people is not a good method of deciding a leader. And were this the case, you wouldn't necessarily see a calm and rational leader who'd be willing to work with the rest of the world. You would see someone my age that wants to just go burn everything to the fucking ground. So I highly doubt that it's something as simple as a gladiatorial kingsman. I definitely think that there's a gladiatorial aspect to it, but I do also believe that there is also a more traditional voting element. Perhaps you need to meet a certain criteria threshold. You can't just be some young buck warrior. You need to have like a name or an achievement, some sort of backing to allow you to enroll within the King's Moot. I also would imagine that this is not an actual, like, I rule all of Del Bar directly, but rather you speak for the clans, and you must gather the elders of the clans to speak and consult about how things are going to go. Which, if this is the case, it's a very decentralized kingdom. That would explain why Del Bar doesn't really seem... I mean, you don't really see that many Del Baran-looking people within the Battle of the Stormspire. It would also explain why Duren, a significantly smaller nation with a much, much less likely to be as martially capable population, is able to defeat Catullus the Viren's army as soundly as they did. Del Bar was divided. There was no unified king. And so it was only a small collection of warriors who actually heralded the call that Cassif made. That, I think, would leave Del Bar open to be a more interesting political player, as now you have these different clans rallying rallying together, trying to figure out who's going to be in charge, and should we stand with Ezrin? Should we take vengeance against Anya? Should we rally behind the cause of Viren and carve away everything east of Del Bar? Furthermore, another factor as to why they perhaps did not side with Viren is the fact that Evanirians were there. It's mentioned in the book, but not explicitly stated why, that the people of Del Bar have a loathing for the people of Evanir. That there is a disrespect and outright hostilities between the two. I would imagine that it could be that Delbarans and Evanirians are partly, at the very least, are because they are on the same coin but opposite sides. Delbarans live in a clime where you need to stand together as brother and sister, father and son. You need to rally around the clan. You need to do everything possible to embrace ideals of honor and duty and sacrifice for those around you. Evanir could plausibly have the opposite type of climate. It could be produced an opposite type of culture. It is a place where loyalty is rewarded with death, where duty is to yourself, and where you do not sacrifice for anyone else because you can only rely on yourself. Family is not your blood lineage, it is who you stand with, and who you stand with are the people who can run and ride and die with you, and those who cannot are abandoned or forgotten, which I will get into in my Evanirian video. Because of this grand nature on tales and of being great champions and in the mountain cultures, smiths, or in Serpent Tongue, merchants, the elderly, the people who have managed to survive, would be seen as immeasurable resources and treated with the utmost of respect. Veteran champions and glorious huntresses would be seen as the utmost leaders of these clans, and I would imagine be the drawing point for the Kingsmoot. Which, that's an interesting word, Kingsmoot. Makes me believe that Del Bar would be a outrightly patriarchal society. But, see, this is where things get interesting. It might be outwardly patriarchal, but I would also see that a lot of the real civic power being held by women. Because if the champions, based off the tales of a king slaying a great dragon, and the huntresses, or a hunter bringing it down with cunning, and later a hunter being described as a woman, I thought this was a very interesting opportunity to display a society with very blatant gender roles, where the men are the champions, going out and slaying the monsters, and the women are the huntresses, providing for the family and hunting things that get a little bit too close to the farmstead. Because now you have this thing where the men are the martial population, they're the ones who wield the raw power in regards to combat effectiveness and politics and glory, but it is the women who are the ones producing the food, rearing the children, and keeping up the homestead, and possibly even managing the business accounts of their husbands, or their sons, or their fathers. Meaning the women would have a lot more power than just raw martial physicality, granting them a greater level of independence. You see this in states like Laconia, or Sparta for the layman, where the men were more focused on martial activities, and the women gained a lot more power because they were the ones managing the businesses. You would also see this somewhat in China, where it was expected of men to be the provider, and yet, in a lot of cases, women were the ones crafting everything for the home, being out in the field alongside the men when they couldn't get enough workers to work the fields, and also rearing the children and preparing food and doing all this work. They held a greater amount of power, but due to the martiality of the men and the culture of China, they were relegated to effectively second-class citizens. In Del Bar, where even the women must be combat effective due to the harsh and dangerous monstrosities, sure, a man might be able to cut them down with a greatsword. He'd actually have to close that distance before getting blown apart by a bow or a bow gun. So there would be a level of martial equality, and thus grant women a greater level of power within the dynamics. Though, based on Kingsmoot and king being the predominant terminology, I would imagine that outwardly Del Bar comes off as a more patriarchal society, and especially in the mountains where even the role of smithing would be a greatly prized and important career path, which would predominantly be done by men simply due to physiological differences. It would be very much a surface-level patriarchy. In actuality, women control a lot more of the civic power. And let me just, before we continue into like the differences among the different ethnic populations, cultural populations of Del Bar, I am not saying a woman could not be a smith or a champion in such society, and I'm not saying a man could not be a hunter or a homemaker in such a society. I am speaking in broad generalizations. Just like when I say in a broad generalized fact, Americans are fat, or that Japanese people are old, it is simply a statistical reality that this is the average truth. In Del Bar, you could see women champions, women tribal leaders, and male hunters and male homemakers, but that would not be the norm, that would not be the common factor, but it is not impossible to occur. With that out of the way, let's hope I didn't get dislikes for saying that men and women are different. Next point. Serpent Tongue is going to be what I think is the weakest of the Del Baran population groups. Mostly because it's going to be so vastly different. It's going to be the one that's doing the most trade with the outside world, and due to this, would also plausibly have greater connections to Evenir, isolating them from the rest of Del Bar due to that hatred, due to the coastal raiding done by Evenir. I'll get into more of that later. I would also see that based on the mythology of the clever hunter, Serpent Tongue would be one where would be a more matriarchal society, where women have a lot more ruling power, which again would kind of clash with a more patriarchal Del Bar, where officially speaking, the running capacities should be done by men, not women, even if women have a level of economic and civic power over their husbands, sons, brothers, and fathers. Furthermore, Serpent Tongue would be one of the centrally richest regions. Around the city of Serpent Tongue, possibly to a point east, you'll be seeing where I imagine that kingdom would be on the map, would be regions that are either tribes that are vassalized by Serpent Tongue and are thus held by its cultural sphere of influence, or lands directly held and patrolled by Serpent Tongue. I would also imagine that Serpent Tongue would have a higher population of dark mages due to the trade with Evenir. Not saying you can't find dark mages in other places in Del Bar, especially with all the monsters mentioned previously, but the ones in Serpent Tongue would have a more traditional-looking appearance of the dark mages, like what we've seen with Viren and Claudia. Though Del Baran dark mages, or Deep Del Baran dark mages as I'll refer to them, might seem like more animalistic shamans, or something more akin to what the Germanics or the Norse or the Gaelics did with their druidic magics, only with a little bit of blood magic thrown in. There would be a lot more organized monster hunts due to the wealth that Serpent Tongue has to bear, and I could even see the monster population being a minimal problem because of that. Because, again, if they're rallying and having an organized military to deal with the monster population, the monsters wouldn't be killing people as much. On the opposite side of the kingdom, and the opposite side of the spectrum, you have Hinter Peak, a kingdom of smiths. This would be a center of Del Baran culture. Unlike Serpent Tongue, which is importing from the rest of the world, Hinter Peak could be described as the Del Baran culture. Their first king slew a dragon in this great mountain range. And it is where the great smiths rally to turn the ore of the mountains into the weapons of Del Baran people. That would definitely be a population and a culture that trickles down further than the imported beliefs of the rest of the world. I would even see possibly a religion built around either the steel or the strength of man, or even forge gods and mountain gods and great forest spirits forming here, whereas Serpent Tongue would be a hodgepodge mix of the Del Baran beliefs and whatever beliefs are imported from the rest of the world. Hinter Peak would also possibly be the seat of the Del Baran throne, and it might even be the Hinter Peak are the ones who provide the king of Del Bar more often than others. Hinter Peak would have a massive influence over the region within it, and possibly even further, though its direct control would be those mountains and the forests directly around the mountains. This region would definitely be a lot more patriarchal due to the importance of the smiths and the lack of external culture affecting it. I would even possibly argue that you would see fewer hunters, as Hinter Peak would be... The monsters in Hinter Peak would be a lot more dangerous. As previously mentioned, these are creatures that are more brutal than anything else in Del Bar, and to be killed would need to be dealt with by the greatest of champions. And the huntresses that are in these lands who are able to bring down griffins and bathers and greymen, if greymen even exist, would most likely be the most sought-after women and would have their pick of any spouse across Del Bar. These would be queens in their own rights under the privileges of the kings of Hinterpeak. Going further, you've got the different cultural groups. I would picture there being 4 outside of the Serpent Tongue in Hinterpeakers. You would have the coastals. These are the people who are fishing and maybe doing a little bit minor trading with along the coast and rivers around Del Bar, but not as much as Serpent Peak. These people would have a more aquatically driven population rather than that of the forest or the plains. They would not hunt musk bears and wolves and buckens and bathers. They would go into the deep and hunt worms and great sharks and squids. Huntresses would not be fearful of boars and wolves coming for their flocks and their children, but rather harpies swooping down and snatching up their child. And the threat of a kelpie would be the worst thing for a mother, because you can hear a harpy coming, but the only thing you know, the only proof you have that a kelpie came is that your child is gone. And as such, the waters would be a place that children are kept away from at all costs. The beaches would be a place for warriors and hunters alone, and any child found there would be disciplined brutally. North, in the northern part of Del Bar, those open plains and hilllands and lowlands would be what I refer to as the openlands culture. These would be predominantly cattle ranchers, kind of like what you see in Scotland or other places where there's not as much good soil. However, unlike Scotland and real world, these would be bull riders. Nobles would train specific bulls to be used in battle, armored with heavy imported bardings from Hinterpeak with claymores or great pikes wielded on the back of these creatures. And Vulvar would be cattle hands, keeping watch over massive herds of thick-coated bulls and cows. Kalkara and cannibals, which I will get into later, would be the predominant threat of these open territories, striking out from the hills and the hinterlands and the forests that are unwatched by the other clans. Wolves and boars and buckens would also be threats, though boars less so, as they would prefer to stay in the forests. And the open lands would certainly not be a safe place, but I would imagine, except for the winter, would be a much better opportunity to survive in than the forests. Going into the forests would be the both richest in regards to agricultural goods, but also the most brutal to live in. You would have the breeding grounds of monsters in those woods coming at you every day. You would find dead champions and dead huntresses lining the groves and the thistles. It would be horrific to grow up in the forests, but it would breed some of the strongest people of Del Bar. And the farms of Del Bar would be centralized in the forests, for that is where the best nutritional soil could be found for growing crops. They would be peoples with dark magic and other forms of magic in tuned with nature deeply, and the application of which would not just be used for warfare, but possibly even for the growing of crops and for finding patches of soil or rejuvenating the soil itself with the blood and tears and bits of monsters. Finally are the cannibals, people who were driven out of society for being criminals or monsters, or people who simply got lost and were forced to commit an evil by all standards of morality, the devouring of human flesh. Such people would be mad heretics living on the fringes of society, stealing weapons and food and possibly pulling away stragglers and devouring them live. Such people would revere the Kalkara, a near-human creature of immense power and ferocity, as a living god, awarding it with silver which it covets, and flesh and chances to kill. During the winter, when there's not much to go around, the Kalkara would rally these cannibal tribes and strike at the civilized world. And by the end of winter, there would be plenty of hapless souls abandoned in the snow to be drawn in to the Kalkara's flock. Finally, and this is the fun one, warfare. Mankind We've been doing this, perfecting this since we figured out a rock makes a punch better. What would warfare look like? Well, out of all of the populations in humanity, Del Bar would have the most decentralized combat structure in the world. Save for Serpent Tongue, it would effectively just be clans rallying their young men and young women to go out and kill whoever's around them. After Serpent Tongue, I would say the coast settlements would have the best forces for fighting humans at the very least, for they are used to Evanerian raids. Though they would be better at defending, using fortresses and choke points rather than campaigning into other people's territories. The cattle, the open plains would provide heavy cataphract bull riders, and if they're not those, then the people who are used to winterly raids against the cannibal tribes. And the forests would breed men and women who may not be good in formations, but could be one-man armies used to facing horrors that would make a Catolan or a Neolandian or a Duranian cry themselves to sleep before getting their jugulars ripped open. Armed with steel from the Winter Peak and funded by Serpent Tongue's ports, such an army, could you rally Del Bar together in totality, would be something that all the other kingdoms would have to rally together to stop. And I don't think they could. So it's a good thing Del Bar will probably forever be a fractured and shattered peoples divided up by their tribal and familial loyalties and kept from forming into large cities by the threats of the monster populations, keeping them in these smaller familial groups for risk of abandoning the land that they know is safe. Thank you all for watching. I am the Shadow of the Hawk. Hopefully the next couple of videos in this series will be done quicker. If you think I'm an idiot, leave a dislike, leave a comment explaining why you think I'm an idiot. I would love to know. If you think I'm onto something, leave a comment down below. Let's get this conversation going, boys and girls. And again, thank you for watching. You spent 30 minutes watching this. If you got here, that means a lot to me. Helps my channel grow. Have a good one. See you next time when we talk about the Pirate Lords, the Dark Mages, and the Merchants of Evanir.